All right. Well, hello and welcome to Transition Tea, the podcast dedicated to demystifying the world of healthcare, transition, and activation planning. I'm your host, Kelly Guzman, President and CEO of Yellow Brick Consulting. Today, I am honored to have Mary Rivera joining us. So, Mary, welcome to our podcast. And can you provide our listeners with a brief background about you?
Sure. Thank you, Kelly. I'm really excited to be here with you and whoever else is with us today. My background is actually kind of all over the place. I started as a surgery scheduler right out of college in a hospital, and then I loved the whole dynamic world of the operating room and eventually became a small unit manager. And then I decided, gee, I should go to nursing school. Even my college degree was not in nursing. So I went back to school, became a nurse, and was fortunate to start in the OR. So I really did a little bit of everything. I was a surgery scheduler. I packaged instruments. I cleaned rooms. I scrubbed. I circulated. I became a unit manager at a hospital. And then my last role in the hospital actually was peri-op director, where I was in charge of 5 departments. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned so much along the way. So I've kind of done a little bit of everything in my career. And currently I teach peri-op nursing to new nurses who want to become surgical nurses. So, and also love my role with Yellow Brick as a facilitator. So a little bit of everything.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So I'm going to dig into some of those topics a little bit later, but so today we're drinking a breakfast blend tea, and nice and it's like regular old tea. It's just yummy. So
very smooth.
Listeners, grab a cup and let's talk transition. So let's go back and tell us about that first job in healthcare, or like what led you to a career in healthcare.
Well, I think that what really led me to that career was seeing all the different facets of what goes into, and particularly in my case, in the operating room. I loved all the different roles that people played, and how the operating room, because it's such a specialty area, really interacts so deeply with all the other areas of the hospital, be it pathology, the lab, taking patients from the OR to ICU, our recovery room, pre-op areas. And so the OR is like a little microcosm of a world in unto itself, but can't exist alone. So we do a lot of interactions with other departments, and I always really liked that. I like being part of a team. That's why I like OR nursing, because you're just one cog in the wheel. So I always liked that.
Thank you for that. And then tell me about your experience in design and transition. I met you many years ago at El Camino, and tell us about that experience and how you got involved.
Sure. That was such a very special time in my professional career. I was a director of departments that I had not been in charge of before. One of them was endoscopy, and then the cath labs. And so when we started to work with you on the planning and design of the operating rooms, it was decided there would be 10 ORs and 5 kind of contiguous hybrid cath labs at the end of the operating rooms, which is a very different model. That was in 2009. When it came to fruition. But of course, the planning was many years beforehand. But I remember being part of the team with you and not even knowing what questions to ask, really. It was just such a different world. I had never really opened a new whole operating room area before. And so I just remember that the advice and the kind of the collaboration between the hospital people and the transition planning group was just vital, because we didn't really know what questions to even ask. And so that part of the design and deciding, where everything is going to fit together was just a wonderful experience for me, and something I've really carried through my whole career right now. So
it's a great point that you bring up, because I feel like I was in the same position, and I was an emergency department director, and I had managed various areas when I was at UCLA. And then getting into the transition role, I was like, well, what do you do? And, kind of what kind of questions do you ask? So I think part of what we do as transition planners is bring that process forward and have questions and a checklist of things for people so that they can continue to be the experts that they are, and then they have a path. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and if you can tell us about your current role. So you're an educator and you teach perioperative nursing. So tell us about that.
That's right. So it's actually a wonderful experience right now to kind of come full circle in my career. So I'm teaching nurses all the basics of becoming an operating room nurse. And, Kelly, it's really true. I take a lot of what I've learned from Yellow Brick and transition planning into my teaching methodology, because I try to let them see it piece by piece. Because if you look at the whole picture, if you bring a nurse into the OR and try to teach her periop nursing in a 16-week program, everything from positioning to prepping to patient assessments and every single piece of equipment in between, it's too much for them to chew. I always say to them, we don't want to give you the whole meal at once. We need to give you the appetizer, then you're going to have the salad, then you're going to have your main meal, and you'll put it all together for a beautiful, beautiful meal at the end, or a beautiful program. And it's sort of the same with transition planning, I feel. All the advice that we get and the small little bits that go into every project are what, the culmination comes together, and it's fabulous to see it at the end. That's part that I love so much about being the facilitator and seeing it come to fruition, like on Move Day. All those little pieces came together, but it really was because people had the ability to sit down, plan, listen to one another, ask a lot of stupid questions that you just have no idea about, and come up with a real roadmap, so it's really been awesome.
Thank you for that. So how did your role in healthcare and nursing, and just like working as a nurse, was there anything specific or any kind of skills or critical thinking from working as a nurse that helped you in your role in transition?
My role as a facilitator, is that what you're mostly talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Yes, a lot of things. I would mostly say that I would say mentoring, and I know you and I talked about it before, being able to realize that the people who are going through this process, and they're on their journey, they're not on my journey, they're not on any transition planning team's journey, they're really on their own path to try to plan and design a new facility. And so I guess listening and mentoring are the most important parts. And acting as a facilitator, the day that we go to do the dress rehearsal is a day that I've come to realize is really scary for them, because they have the scenarios, they know what they're going to go through, what items they're going to check from least important to most important, but they don't really know what the process is. And I think as a facilitator, I like the role of mentoring. That's why I like teaching right now, and being able to just be that supportive voice of calm, if you will, just trying to say, let's everybody slow down. Let's just take one of these questions at a time and go through it as a group, keeping everybody together and all that. So I think probably my experience in work, like I said before, working as a team in the OR and then in management, maybe has helped me try to bring some of that into the world of transition planning.
Thank you for that. So the ORs and the procedural areas are notorious for being some of the more challenging areas, I think, a lot of the times, because they're going, as you mentioned, from having very dedicated areas to having shared space. And I know in working with you that you love to plan and you love to be prepared, and you always have questions for me. So when you prepare, what are the things that you do to prepare yourself for that dress rehearsal when you're going into a new facility, when you're getting ready? Like, how do you get your mindset and to be prepared to meet new people that you've never met before?
Right. That's a great question. I think that you're right. I'm a person who likes to be prepared. And so I like that you and your team always send out to those of us that are facilitators well ahead of time what our scenarios will be like. For example, in the operating room, we would have a scene where a patient is coming from the emergency room to have emergency surgery. They're going to be a direct admit. How do the nurses in the OR plan for that? How do they go down and pick up the patient? What's the path of travel? What their workflow will be? And then understanding that the connectivity with all the other departments is just so vital. And so that's, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question properly, but that's one of the things that I really think about when we talk about planning and design and everything. Do the operating rooms want to be next to ICU, for example? You have intubated patients coming from the OR. Of course, the best path of travel is that they're going to be on the same floor and not be waiting by the elevators with somebody who's intubated and critical. And kind of some of those things I know from my practice have gone into what I think about when I go into new facilities. Mostly, I can say though, I try to be a supportive person for the person who's leading the scenario, because my planning is that I know what I'm going to say to them as a group, how I'm going to say to them, let's stay together as a group, let's have one conversation, try to ratchet it down, because, you know, when we meet, like in the lobby or wherever we meet up with our person that's in charge of that department, you can kind of feel the tension, you know, everybody's excited and we're all nervous and anxious to get into the new space, yet we want to be the voice of calm. So I guess that's one of the main things I try to do.
Do you have any words of advice for a manager or an educator, you know, on the flip side? So they're the ones who are needing to prepare their team. Is there any kind of words of advice? And you've been through this, so you know you've been on both sides. How do you help the staff, and any kind of special tools or advice that you have?
I think a couple of things I could think of is be inclusive, really have the right people for the day of the dress rehearsal. So sometimes they'll just only have nurses and maybe they don't have the anesthesia tech or an anesthesiologist or a surgeon. And we really need all those players to make it really come alive. And the other part is in the development, and I know you and your teams, Kelly, work hard on these, the development of the dress rehearsals and the scenarios. And because each facility is quite different in what their practice is. And I think that, you know, what does their OR really see? Do they go to emergency room? Is it a trauma center? Do they get a lot of, you know, crazy patients coming in that need to go directly to the OR? And is it a scene like that? Or is it maybe a smaller community hospital? Maybe they don't even have an emergency room. What is their practice? And then making sure the scenarios align with that, so that when we practice with them, this is really real life for us. This is what we do most of the time. We do go to the ED and pick up patients, or we do go to the ICU and pick up patients. And so trying to make those come alive, the scenarios with the proper information, and also having the right players, I think is really helpful.
It comes back to the communication and being inclusive for sure. So how about your biggest lesson learned from either like your first experience, any big ahas, like, you know, when you were activating your first facility and you thought, oh, this is how it's going to work, and then it was completely different? Or
Well, one of them, it's funny because you and I have talked about this in the past. One of them was when you're activating and you're planning for everything, sometimes there just really are things that you just have not thought about. It could be years ahead of time. One of the ones we came up with was the laser plugs. So in the ORs, you have to have the 220 volts in order to have the laser plugged in. It's a very specific type of a plug. And if we go into a new OR and we see that they don't have those, that's something that just kind of has to be retrofitted. It's not a big deal, but those are the things that I used from personal experience of you know, realizing, oh my gosh, we forgot about that. The other things we've also noticed is if they have a Neptune suction system, do they have a docking station built into their little EVS closet? Because you have to have a place to, you know, go to its repository at the end of the case. And so those are some little things from experience. If I could for a second, though, I'd like to backtrack a little bit about El Camino with the 10 ORs that were so beautiful and the 5 hybrid rooms at the end, because that was a big, big challenge for me. Because when we integrate ORs with hybrid rooms and you have cath lab doctors and interventionalists who are going into the sterile environment and they're not used to it, they're used to coming in wearing their lab coats and, being much more cavalier than we are, very strict in the ORs across the red line, of course. And that was a real big challenge. I think that there's few ORs, even now, we've been to some very big facilities who have 5 hybrid rooms sitting within the same space as the operating room. So kudos to El Camino Hospital, because I think they did an awesome job in planning that to make that one group. Let's bring the cath lab people in. We cross-trained people. People in the cath lab learned how to scrub open heart, and vice versa. People in the OR learned how to go into the cath lab environment and do those kind of minimally invasive procedures. So I just wanted to mention that, because that was something in the planning and design. I think that was a really well thought out plan.
It continues to be something that we're definitely challenged with. And just back to your point about the lasers and the Neptune. So, we have a task list. And so I feel like our task list is just filled with lessons learned and things like that. So thank you for that. It continues to be on there over 12 years later. But do you have, just going back to your cath labs within the ORs, I mean, that continues to be an issue. So do you have any advice? You talked about cross training, but from a timing perspective, is there a best practice in terms of, like, when do you do that cross training? Is it months before? Is it just before?
I think that's a great question, Kelly. I honestly think that trying to do it months before people open lets them know. So we had even a thing of, well, don't we have our own lounge? So it was an OR and a cath lab lounge together, but they were used to being very separate. So it went down to that kind of minutia. But training people ahead of time is always a challenge. Sometimes people who are OR people are very comfortable within their own environment. We know, just like everybody else. And they were fine with crossing over to another area because they had sort of done that in the past a little bit. Like if we had a patient that needed a trach up in ICU, OR staff goes up, brings the equipment and supplies and instruments and whatnot, and we'll do it up there. So it isn't that they hadn't been used to going into other areas, but this was a concerted effort, and mostly because when you have open heart surgeons that are also going to go into the cath lab, like to do a core valve or something like that, you're going to have heart surgeons and you're going to have interventionalists, cardiologists doing that. Those two working together, they all want their own teams. They want the people that they're comfortable with. So the training and the crossover is just so important. And, the person in the cath lab who trained in open heart, he scrubbed many, many open heart cases. He went to central processing. He learned all the open heart instruments and everything. So, I mean, his whole training was just so vital to the success of that program, but also for himself. He loved that he learned how to do it. And then he subsequently trained some other people too, which was a real benefit for their experience. Yeah,
that's a great example. And we do recommend having champions to do the train the trainer model, so that you have those internal experts who feel confident and know their script and can, kind of show off to their new team what they're doing. So how about, there's obviously a lot of training, and you teach perioperative nursing. Is there a particular skill or something that you had to learn that you dreaded learning that was very painful,
a lot of things
that turned out to be invaluable in what you're doing today?
Yes, I can tell you that it's not really I guess it is a skill, but I used to be very, very afraid of public speaking. It's the number one fear for everybody in the United States, at least they say. And I was not comfortable being a good public speaker. I would get very nervous and very rattled. And then I found that once I started, to speak, I was fine. But it was the beginning jitters of everything. And I realized that also being a facilitator for Yellowbrick, that you're in huge groups. When we were at some of our big places where we've been, it can be a group of 20 or 30, 40 people that are waiting for you to give them direction and kind of lead the show to let the whole party start, sort of. And it can be very intimidating. And I think that I learned through teaching and through just doing that as a facilitator, that sharing knowledge is just so important. It really is. And when I stepped back to say, what am I afraid of? I know all these things. I know how a lot about the operating room, not everything, but I know a lot about it. And I certainly can help them in their new space. And it just, for some reason, it seemed like it took a lot of the fear away. And I no longer have that. I still get a little bit nervous, like even today coming here, this is a new format to do it. But that's something that I think has helped me in both my personal, professional career, teaching, and also with being a facilitator. So.
I was thinking that you were going to say this platform, because the both of us talked about the learning curve of,
well, that's another one.
Reporter. And it's just become a way of life. So
yeah, it's
I
true.
do think that many of us have been humbled by, I think we're both lifelong learners, and I tend to go towards things that I enjoy doing, but sometimes you just got to embrace the suck and embrace those difficult things. So thank you for
very true.
sharing that.
Yeah. Nope.
Do you have any favorite projects that you've been on, and why are they your favorite projects? Or,
let me see. Probably one of my most favorite projects was when we were at the Kimmel Pavilion in New York. And I loved that experience because I think at our opening session with everybody there, we had like 300 or 400 people there. And I was so excited to be part of that group. It was a beautiful facility. I have only been to New York a couple of times, so I was excited about the city, about walking through the streets to get to Kimmel Pavilion and seeing what a dynamic place that was. I loved that project. I loved every part about it. Their teams were super grateful. I think they really realized that, and they mentioned this many times. And I think all the groups say this actually at the end, they really couldn't have done it without the help of somebody like Yellowbrick or transition planning teams coming in, because a hospital has to run day-to-day operations. They don't have time really to put into, meetings every day, and all the tiny little parts that go into building and, having a brand new facility open successfully. And they were so grateful, their whole teams, and they used some of the most up-to-date and futuristic technology, excuse me, in the operating rooms that I have ever seen. I mean, just way out there stuff. All their videos and their communication systems and everything were awesome. So I probably rate that one right up there. The Kimmel Pavilion project I thought was awesome.
And it's interesting because I spoke with them, or continue to keep in touch, and they were talking about how part of their design was to have future flexibility and to be able to take care of any kind of patient in those rooms. And as we look at the future, nobody knew the pandemic and that it would hit there at the time. And so they've been able to leverage their new rooms, and we're able to get those patients in and take care of them. So the building really did support patient care. So it's one of my passions.
One other thing I'd love to say is I believe it was, I'm not sure of the facility, so I won't say the name, but they did a very cool thing as far as peri-op services goes. And that's that they built ceiling lifts in their operating rooms. I have never seen that in any hospital, even in, some of the more modern places where they really did that, which was such a great thing for OR personnel to have a ceiling lift to try to bring those patients that are, they're there's a lot of weight for nurses and techs and surgeons and everybody to move patients back and forth on and off gurneys onto beds and whatever. And that was just such a great thing. So I loved that demonstration that they made too, of watching the ceiling lifts in the ORs. We have them in patient rooms now. It's not a big deal anymore, but as far as the OR, putting in all that ceiling infrastructure for that, I thought that was a really dynamite idea. Whoever thought of that and then made it a reality is awesome.
Sure, everybody, the designers love to hear that feedback on things that you think of, and then it actually works out just the way that you wanted it to. So
yeah, it's good.
So a final question for you, and if you could provide advice to someone starting in either transition or as an educator or as a manager, like somebody new in their career, what type of advice would you give that person?
I would probably give advice about really looking inward to all that you've learned through your career, all the parts of not just technical aspects, but I would say communication with other people just in general, because how we treat people, how we treat people who are learning something new, not expecting other people to know everything about what's going to happen with the plan. I just remember feeling very insulated and feeling very safe. And so I would just say somebody wanting to do something like this would really need to say, gee, what have I done in my past nursing career or whatever your career is that's helped you get to where you are today? And then how can you share that information with someone else in a kind and real mentoring way to make them feel good about themselves and not afraid to ask questions and whatnot? That's probably the advice I would give.
I love that advice. And I always enjoy looking for you during the dress rehearsals because you do have that calming effect. And I always walk away feeling really good about just the whole experience. So thank you.
That's so nice. Thanks, Kelly.
Well, I've been enjoying our breakfast blend.
Me too.
There's definitely some caffeine, so I'm wide awake now. Yeah. So I have some rapid fire questions or comments for you. So are you ready for that?
See how I do.
All right. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
How about your favorite city in the United States, except for the one that you live in?
I guess I have to say San Francisco, since that's my home.
Oh, yeah. Introvert or extrovert?
I'm a little of both. I have to say I'm kind of on the fence.
Good answer. How about your favorite holiday?
Favorite holiday is probably Christmas, when our whole family gets together, and I love that time. I don't often get to see them. I live far from them, and I'd say Christmas. Yeah.
I love it. How about a dream vacation destination?
I've been wanting to go to Croatia, and I have not had a chance to go there yet. Have you been?
No, and I want to go with you. So let's do it.
I want to. You're supposed to have beautiful water, and it's supposed to be so beautiful. Any of my friends that have been there have all said, "Oh, it's just gorgeous." So,
all right, we're going to find a nursing conference in Croatia.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, the final one: scrubbing or circulating?
Circulating.
Oh, all right.
And I think because you have kind of control of the whole room like that. Yeah, it's fun.
I haven't done either, so I wasn't sure. So, well, thank you, Mary, for your time today. And if our listeners want to get in touch with you, do you have a LinkedIn profile?
I do.
Mary Rivera?
Yes.
All right. Well, we'll be sure to connect with you, and that will do it for today's Transition Tea. Our next episode, we'll be joined by another healthcare leader to chat over a cup of best practices, pouring over new insights, steeping the next blend of transition and activation expertise. So we thank you all for listening. And if you want to hear more conversations like this one, please subscribe to our Transition Tea wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to see the live videos of our recordings, you can get those on our Yellow Brick YouTube channel. So thank you and cheers.
Thank you. Cheers.